the weak trust nearly vanished. It did not collapse in a single moment. It thinned, call by call, transaction by transaction, until suddenly, everyone realized the same thing at once. Trust was no longer assumed. It was being rationed. To understand why this week mattered, we must return to the invisible contract that holds financial systems together. Trust is not written into regulations. It does not appear on balance sheets. Yet every transaction depends on it. The belief that promises will be kept, that obligations will be honored, that tomorrow will resemble today closely enough to plan. The first reveal begins with hesitation. Counterparties asked more questions than usual. Confirmations took longer. Small frictions appeared where none had existed. Not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to be noticed. Each delay signaled doubt, and doubt spreads quietly before it spreads loudly. The second beat followed as institutions tightened exposure simultaneously. Credit lines shortened. Collateral demands increased. Assurances were requested in writing rather than assumed. No one announced a loss of confidence, but behavior shifted everywhere at once. Trust was no longer free. It had a cost. What made this week dangerous was how ordinary it looked from the outside. Markets still functioned. Payments still cleared. Headlines focused elsewhere. Yet inside the system, relationships were being repriced in real time. Every interaction became conditional. Cooperation was no longer default. By the time leaders realized what was happening, trust had already been partially withdrawn. And unlike liquidity, trust does not return quickly. It requires proof, not promise. Each actor waited for another to move first. The same question echoed silently across the system. Who can still be relied on? Because when trust nearly vanishes, stability does not break immediately. It erodes one decision at a time. As the week unfolded, the erosion accelerated. Institutions no longer assumed continuity. They verified it. Exposure was reassessed daily instead of quarterly. Long-standing relationships were tested against immediate risk. What had once been relational became transactional. Trust was no longer background. It was foreground. The reveal deepened as informal signals replaced formal assurances. Silence from a counterparty raised questions. Delayed responses triggered recalculation. Even neutral behavior was interpreted cautiously. When trust thins, ambiguity becomes threat. Every unanswered call carried weight far beyond its content. The conflict emerged when fear met symmetry. Everyone was pulling back at the same time, not out of panic, but out of prudence. Each institution believed restraint was temporary. Together, restraint became systemic. The system did not freeze, but it tightened everywhere at once. The buildup intensified as guarantees lost power. Verbal reassurances failed to calm nerves. Written commitments were scrutinized. What mattered was not promise, but action. Who would continue lending? Who would keep lines open? Trust shifted from intention to observable behavior. By now, the week had acquired a rhythm of caution. Decisions were delayed. Margins widened. Cooperation required justification. The system still functioned, but only just. It was operating on minimum trust, the lowest level needed to avoid visible fracture. What made this moment fragile was its balance. Too much withdrawal would trigger panic. Too much exposure would feel reckless. Everyone aimed for the same narrow path. And because everyone aimed together, the margin for error disappeared. Trust had not collapsed, but it was being tested continuously. And tests, when repeated too often, eventually change what they measure. The tension peaked when a single hesitation threatened to cascade. One institution delayed a routine commitment, not a withdrawal, not a failure, just a pause. But in an environment where trust was already thin, the pause echoed loudly. Others noticed. Questions spread. Risk desks recalculated within minutes. The conflict sharpened as systems began reacting perception rather than fact. Rumors gained weight because confirmation lagged. Even accurate information arrived too slowly to calm nerves. Trust, once strained, no longer waited for clarity. It moved ahead of it. Decisions were made defensively, not optimally. The buildup intensified as coordination broke down into fragments. Everyone was trying to protect themselves without triggering alarm. The result was collective caution without collective reassurance. No one wanted to be the first to pull back completely. No one wanted to be the first to commit fully. The system hovered in suspension. Inside institutions, pressure mounted. Senior leaders weighed every signal. Acting decisively risked exposure. Doing nothing risked contagion. The usual anchors, models, ratings, history, offered little guidance. This was not a solvency problem. It was a confidence problem. And confidence cannot be forced. By this stage, the realization spread quietly. Trust does not vanish because of failure alone. It vanishes when participants fear being left alone. Each actor was not asking whether the system was safe. They were asking whether others still believed it was. The weak had reached its most dangerous point, not because something broke, but because something might. And when trust becomes conditional on everyone else's belief, stability rests on an invisible edge. One more pause could push it over. One act of commitment could pull it back. Everything now depended on which came first. The turning point came not through announcement, but through action. One institution chose commitment over caution. It honored a line that could have been delayed. Others noticed immediately. The signal mattered more than the amount. It said participation still existed, and participation, once visible, invites response. The climax unfolded in sequence rather than surge. A second commitment followed, then another. Trust did not return all at once. It accumulated. Each fulfilled obligation reduced uncertainty for the next. The system began pricing behavior again, not fear. What had been conditional cooperation became cautious continuity. Authority supported from the background, careful not to overwhelm the moment. Visibility was calibrated, enough to ensure first movers would not be isolated, not enough to suggest panic had been justified. The goal was simple and fragile. Restore belief that acting would be met, not punished. The resolution unfolded over days. Credit lines lengthened modestly. Collateral demands eased. Conversations shortened. The system did not celebrate. It normalized. Trust returned to being assumed rather than negotiated. What had nearly vanished did not come back stronger, but it came back usable. What endured from that week was a sobering lesson. Trust is not restored by reassurance alone. It returns through evidence, through consistency, through small acts repeated under pressure. Systems survive not because everyone believes at once, but because enough people choose to act before certainty returns. Europe did not escape that week unchanged. Participants remembered how quickly cooperation thinned, and how quietly it could be rebuilt. Trust was treated with more care afterward, not as a constant, but as a resource requiring maintenance. Because when trust nearly vanishes, what saves a system is not certainty. It is the courage to act without it. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. The